Yeah, well, it's good to meet you guys.
Yeah.
Likewise.
All right, well, first of all, I'm a big fan of your work. I think that everything you guys have done has been incredibly unique, different, and I'm wondering, I love the Hollywood time period of 1950s. I think it's an interesting era, and I'm wondering, hypothetically speaking, if you two were directors in that era and you were making films in that era, what kind of movies do you think you would have been making?
It's a really good question because it's very hard to think yourself into that situation. We are such products of the scene, the sort of early independent film scene where you weren't working in the studio machine at all. And the stuff that we've done in connection with studios sort of came later, and we were already sort of very sort of independent of the machine at that point. So it's hard to think of I think it's difficult for us to imagine ourselves into the situation where you were sort of, churning out 2 pictures a year and working at the assignment of a corporation. That doesn't really answer your question.
I don't know. It would have been, but we might have enjoyed it if we'd been, put in the time machine and dumped back there. I mean, I can see us doing, I like good noirs now, and that's like they were kind of dying out when we get to the period we're talking about in this movie, the early 50s. But, I don't know, that would have been fun to make. I kind of watch some movies now of that period thinking not just enjoying the movies, but thinking that I would have liked to have worked with that guy or, an actor or whatever. It would have been fun.
Yeah, or, if you could imagine actually someone like, if you take the career of someone like John Huston, and you say, well, he, jumped around a lot and did many, many, many great movies. He did some that were not so great, but it's not impossible to imagine sort of working in the studio and going from movie to movie and trying to find that kind of material.
Now, I'm a big fan of Roger Deakins. I think arguably the greatest cinematographer of all time. And I love that you went back to film for this. And I'm a big 35. I love celluloid. I love the way film looks. I don't think anything will ever top the way film looks. And I'm not a digital guy. And I'm wondering, this is the first film he shot on film since True Grit. And I'm wondering, the choice of having him go back to that, did he not want to do it at first because he'd been working digitally so long? How did you convince him to go back to film?
He was up for it. I think he was a little surprised we wanted to shoot it on film. That's true. And he has been doing stuff just on the Alexa since True Grit.
Like that, yeah,
all that stuff. It's true. Everything he's done since True Grit until this movie was done. But when after sort of talking to him about it and just by virtue of the fact that this movie is so about in many ways old technology, I think Roger was perfectly happy to do it on film. I think he enjoyed it. It certainly looks beautiful.
Agreed.
So, not that big a deal.
What are your feelings on film versus digital? Because, for example, you look at something like No Country for Old Men, which is arguably one of the greatest shot films I've ever seen in my life. And I can't imagine what that would look like shot digitally. As directors who have been working on film, obviously all your careers, Blood Simple to now, what do you feel about the digital age, and do you want to always shoot on film? People like Nolan and Tarantino are very big film advocates as well. Is that something you just really want to continue doing?
Well, fundamentally, yes. But I have to say, I think the most important thing is that, you never know. You're right. It doesn't look the same when you shoot digitally, but that doesn't mean that it isn't necessarily right depending on what the story or the project is. So what you want is to have the choice, and you want to preserve the choice, essentially. And in that respect, I think it's great that Chris Nolan went and he made this deal with the studios to support further manufacture of film, at least for a while. I think it's great that people are also looking for alternative ways of doing the lab work,
right?
Which is the other big problem with shooting on film. So I think the thing, I think I speak for Ethan probably on this too. I'm not sure. That I think the thing that's a little less important to us is how how the movies are delivered to a movie theater.
Right. Because your movie's going to be displayed digitally on most theaters in the country.
Right. Yeah, almost all at this point.
Yeah, right.
But our bias is always going to be towards film, just because That's what we grew up with. That's what we've been handling. Although, you could say the same with Roger, and he's happy enough to move on to change to digital.
Right.
And who knows? You could. It's not impossible to think there might be something you do at a certain point, and you kind of do some tests, and you go, you know what? Actually, shooting this digitally might look really interesting. So it's more a question like all kinds of, like a lot of these issues, which is more what's right for the story.
Now, I think Carter Burwell, again, you guys collaborate with the best people ever. I mean, Deakins, Sonnenfeld, Carter Burwell's been doing your scores forever. I mean, obviously he did Blood Simple as well. I'm wondering, you guys direct scores so beautifully, and they're leading characters, especially Fargo. That score is a leading character in the film, and I'm wondering...
That is a really good score. We were just listening to the credit music for Fargo.
We went to a screening of Fargo and had to... God knows we didn't want to sit through the movie. But we came in at the end and heard the end credit cue with the main theme of the movie on the end credits, and it sounded great.
Yeah, it's a great score.
It is a good score. I totally agree. That was a really great Carter Burwell score.
Sorry, go ahead.
It was based on some old Scandinavian folk tune that Carter had heard somewhere.
Yes,
played
called
the Little Lost Sheep or something.
The Lost Sheep, or something. But yes, I mean very loosely based melodically, or part of the melody on. Yeah.
Well, that's my question. Is you guys? The scores are so prominent in your film. I mean, Carter's score, in this movie is incredible. And I'm wondering, do you direct a score as if you would direct an actor? Because the scores have arcs to them, just like the actors do.
No, I mean...
Carter really knows what he's doing. We talk about it with him. He goes and does his thing, and we talk about what he's done, and sometimes talk about adjusting it, and sometimes not. And sometimes what he does bears no relation to what we talked about.
You go, okay, that's not what we talked about, but it works. So it's a little all over the map. Or sometimes he'll do something and we'll go, it's almost there, but it needs to be a little bit more like this or that and the other thing, which he totally gets. It's a work in progress, and it's like any other, sometimes like any other collaboration where you're just, you're working with someone and they're feeling their way into it and you're feeling your way into it, but it's really Carter who's doing it.
Some of the films you've made, Joel you just direct, and then some of them are dual. And I'm wondering, like, for example, No Country for Old Men was both of you, but Fargo is just you.
Well,
what's the decision on that?
Well, early on, the first however many movies it was, I took the credit as director, Ethan took the credit as producer. But in fact, the movies have always, from the very beginning, been co-directed. We're not making movies any different from we've ever made movies.
Right.
It was more, I think, a little bit out of some misguided or mistaken impression early on that we had to sort of protect our prerogatives in both areas, and that if we each assigned ourselves individually to one title or another, we wouldn't be assigned a producer or something, But in fact, the movies have always been completely co-directed.
Interesting. One of my favorite shots in the history of movies is Blood Simple, when you have the beer that goes down the bar. The shot of the beer, and Barry Sonnenfeld is a genius. I mean, we shot that film back in the day. Do you remember how that rig looked? Like what that looked like when you were shooting that shot?
You mean camera floating down
the
bar,
camera turning over the thing? Yeah,
it was just on a track and cantilevered so we could lift over the guy.
It was on what you call a ubangi, which is a term grips use for a little platform that sticks out from the dolly. And the dolly was, if I remember correctly, actually it was operated in a way that you almost never operate a dolly during a shot, where they were booming it, up and down in one little tiny move, like that.
I always wanted to know that. I love that shot so much. Now, wrapping me up, the last question for you. I think one of the most gorgeous shots in this film is the Scarlett Johansson when we first see her, and that whole water sequence. And if I'm not mistaken, it appeared to be almost one shot for a long time. And I'm assuming that when the water flies up, is that where the cuts are happening? So how did that shot happen? That's an incredible shot.
Yeah, right, it's all real in-camera stuff, the stuff looking down at the girls doing those formations, and they're different parts of that routine are connected by the water jetting up and doing an invisible cut. The actual water jetting up is a different element. It was not shot with the girls. But,
wow.
it was.
I mean, again, that was interesting to do that sequence because unlike the sequences for aquatic sort of, choreography like that in the time, which was all done in camera, we were doing some in camera and we were doing some as either multiple layers of different elements or CGI, right? Most of it is actually not computer-generated imagery, but it is compositing. So we would composite the water jets over the girls, patterning in the water. That's something they didn't do at the time, obviously. They didn't have the technology to do that.